They weren't professionals. No masks, no real weapons, no plan. Just anger, recklessness, and the insane idea of robbing a bank in broad daylight. What happened inside turned into pure chaos, a desperate heist that spiraled out of control and shocked the entire city. I'm Santa, and tonight I'll tell you the unbelievable story of a robbery that was doomed from the very first second. It started in a rented room above a pawn shop where 4 friends argued about rent and respect. They had loud opinions and empty pockets. One said the city never gave them anything. Another said the city didn't even know they existed. They were 20-somethings who mistook impatience for strategy and noise for power. The one with the biggest mouth, Nate, pitched the idea like it was a way to win back time. Hit a small neighborhood bank at noon. In and out. Nobody gets hurt. Grab what's in the drawers, run. He said it like he already knew how it would end. He didn't. None of them did. Why they did it was simple: debt and ego. Malik's mother needed money for a surgery he couldn't afford. Jay had been fired after showing up late 3 times and told everyone it was politics. Rafi wanted to leave town and needed a clean slate he couldn't buy with minimum wage. Nate wanted to prove he wasn't just a guy complaining in a room over a pawn shop. They convinced themselves the bank was faceless, insured, a victim that wouldn't feel anything. They convinced themselves that quick meant easy. They talked about timing like they were planning a lunch break. They didn't have guns. They had 2 plastic pistols from a novelty shop, a screwdriver wrapped with black tape to look like a barrel, and a pocket knife that had rust on the hinge. They had hoodies, not masks. They had no scanner, no lookout, no exit car stashed in a quiet alley. They had a borrowed sedan with a bad muffler. They had adrenaline and a deadline. The rent was due Friday. The plan was for Thursday at noon. No one cased the bank. Nate stood outside 2 days earlier with a coffee and watched people go in and out for 10 minutes. He decided that made him an expert. He saw an older guard who stood with a hand on his hip like patrolmen in old movies. He saw a branch manager who walked fast and checked her watch a lot. He saw tellers who smiled too easily. He wrote those judgments in his head like facts. He never checked where the silent alarm was. He never looked for cameras. He never wondered how many drawers could be opened without a manager's key. He never thought about die packs. The things he didn't know were already waiting for him on the other side of the door. They argued all morning about who would do what. By the time they finally left the room, they were late, angry, and louder than they should have been. Malik drove because he was the calmest behind the wheel. Nate took the lead because he always did. Jay wore sunglasses to look hard. Rafi bounced his knee the whole ride and kept saying, "We got this," like repetition could plug holes. The car rattled at lights. A delivery truck blocked their lane. Nothing went smooth. That was the first warning. They took it as a sign to hurry. They parked wrong, right in a 15-minute loading spot in front of the bank with the nose of the car halfway into a red zone. They left the engine on and the door cracked because that's what people do in movies. It took 3 seconds for someone on the sidewalk to notice, then look away. City people mind their own business. The 4 stepped out like a wave, one behind the other. Nate pushed the glass door with his shoulder and walked in fast. The bank was ordinary. Counters, pens on chains, posters about savings accounts, a bowl of mints nobody wanted. The security guard, Harris, stood next to a fake plant and tried to look friendly because that's what the manager asked him to do. The line had 6 people. At desk 4, a teller was showing an elderly man how to sign a check. 2 offices were occupied. One door was open with a woman on a headset scheduling an appointment for someone who wanted a mortgage. Nate raised his fake gun and shouted, "Nobody move." It came out too high, like a boy trying to be a man. The first 2 people in line froze, then turned slowly. The manager heard the tone and looked up. Harris stepped forward out of habit, not heroism. Jay yanked a woman's arm and pushed her toward the waiting chairs. Rafi pointed the taped screwdriver at the ceiling and told everyone to sit down now. Malik hated this part. He put his hood up and kept his eyes down. The moment Nate shouted, the silent alarm was already pressed. The manager's knee touched a button under her desk as naturally as blinking. The call went out. The system timestamped it. Dispatch sent units. From the first second, the clock wasn't theirs. Nate vaulted a low gate and faced the tellers. "Open the drawers," he screamed, waving the plastic pistol as if volume could make plastic look like steel. The tellers saw the gun and didn't know it was fake. Fear makes details soft. One teller pulled open the top drawer and slid out a stack. "More," Nate said. She pulled another. He stuffed them into a backpack. He yelled again, "Under the counter." She glanced at the manager, then moved slowly. Behind her, a second teller shook and fumbled with the key. The manager told them to comply. She repeated it. She kept her voice level. People mirror the calmest voice in the room. Harris took a step. Jay pointed the toy gun at his chest and said, "Stay." Harris froze. He had a family and a bad knee. Nothing on his belt could stop 4 men in a room with hostages. He did what smart guards do. He gave them the bank. He refused to let his ego turn into a memorial plaque. Rafi's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He told an old man to sit. The old man said he had a heart condition. Rafi shouted that he didn't care, then looked like he cared, then said, "Just sit down again." Malik dragged a chair to block the vestibule and kept glancing at the door. The vestibule glass showed a smear of their car's rear window out front. He told himself that car would be waiting when they ran. He believed his own sentence because it kept his hands from trembling. The manager said, "The vault is on a time lock." Nate snapped back that he didn't want the vault. He wanted everything in the drawers. "Don't be a hero," he said, like a line he'd practiced. She nodded and began opening more drawers with her key. She slipped a bundle with a dye pack into the pile without changing her expression. That's what training looks like. It doesn't flare. It disappears into muscle memory. Outside, a patrol car rolled by and didn't stop. The officer inside waited for an update, like he was taught to, so he wouldn't blow a perimeter by rushing. A minute later, 2 more units clicked into place at the far corners. A third unit drifted to a bus stop and parked like it had business there. People on the sidewalk filmed the front doors and held their breath. News traveled faster than sirens. Inside, time stretched in a way none of the 4 recognized. The first 30 seconds felt like 1. The next 2 minutes felt like 10. The next 5 felt like forever. That's how panic works. It bends clocks. Nate stuffed money into the backpack and shouted for rubber bands like the bands mattered. Jay made everyone in the lobby put their phones on the floor and slide them forward with their shoes. A man in a suit said he was diabetic and needed his kit. Jay shouted, "Shut up." Malik handed the man his kit anyway. He didn't want someone collapsing on the floor. He didn't want another weight in his head. Rafi went to the door and peered out between the posters. He saw a woman walking a dog stop and stare at the building, then pull back when she saw the patrol car. He saw another car park at the red curb behind theirs and then move when it saw the police. He whispered, "We gotta go." Nate said, 2 more minutes. That sentence carried them into the part of the plan that didn't exist. The phone on the manager's desk rang. The manager answered. The negotiator introduced herself by first name only and asked if everyone was okay. She used the word "okay" the way nurses do, as a way to collect information without sparking panic. The manager said there were customers and staff, with 4 men demanding cash. The negotiator asked if anyone was hurt. The manager said no. The negotiator asked if the men would speak to her. The manager held the receiver out. Nate waved it away. "Hang up," he said. She didn't. She kept listening. "Tell them we're leaving," Nate shouted, but he kept grabbing drawers. The negotiator heard the voices and asked to talk to the person in charge. The manager said he doesn't want to talk. The negotiator said, "That's okay. I'll wait." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't push. She let silence work. Harris watched the 4 move like a weather system across the floor, uncoordinated and loud. He looked at the manager and saw her posture. Straight, calm, hands visible. He mirrored her. He made his hands easy to see. He spread his fingers. He breathed slow. Training can invent courage. It can anchor it. The dye pack popped while Nate was snapping at a teller. A muffled boom inside a bundle. Red dye sprayed through the backpack seam and painted his hoodie in a cloud. He screamed and flung the bag. Jay cursed. Rafi jumped. Malik swore under his breath. The lobby breathed in. The manager looked at the red haze on the carpet and didn't blink. Nate shouted that he needed another bag. The tellers opened drawers with trembling fingers. Another bundle slipped in with another die pack. The system was doing what it was built to do. The negotiator, hearing the shout, said into the line, "Nobody needs to get hurt. If you walk out without a weapon and with your hands up, we can talk about everyone going home alive." Nate snapped, "Nobody's walking out." That was bravado for his crew, not a plan. Plans had already leaked out the die pack seam. Outside, a loudspeaker asked anyone inside the bank to remain calm. More units arrived. An unmarked car slid into a spot across the street. The street was shut at both ends. People filmed from behind the tape. Someone streamed live and guessed wrong about everything. That's what the internet does in a crisis, it narrates noise. Nate yelled for the lobby customers to stand and line up. He said they were leaving with insurance. He said the word without thinking. Jay grabbed two people by the shoulders and pulled them forward. Malik said it was a bad idea. Rafi said they needed cover. The manager said, "Please don't take anyone out there." The phone on her desk hummed while the negotiator listened to the tone of the room through a cheap speaker. The negotiator said, "No one outside wants this to go sideways. If you want a car, we can talk about that. But not if you take people with you. Get the keys," Nate said to the manager. She told him the car they wanted would take time. He said they didn't have time. She said that was exactly why they should talk to the negotiator. He pointed the toy gun at her head from 3 feet away. She didn't close her eyes. She stared back and said, "You don't want to do this." The sentence was simple and true. It beat his noise. Rafi grabbed the door handle to pull it open. The vestibule stayed locked. The manager said the doors needed a release. Nate said, "Open them." She said, "I can't, not while we're under a police alert." He said she was lying. She wasn't. Some systems are smarter than panicked men with plastic guns. Jay moved toward the back corridor and found a door marked "Employees Only." He turned the knob and found it locked. He kicked it and felt the panel give a little, not enough. He kicked again. Harris flinched. The clients flinched. Malik looked like he wanted to leave his own body. Nate told Jay to stop. Jay didn't. He put his shoulder into it, and it opened enough for him to squeeze. Inside were desks, a fridge, and a steel door that needed a code. He hit the door with his palm and told it to open. Steel doesn't care. The negotiator said, "You still have choices," into the line. "If you walk out one at a time with your hands up, I promise you'll be treated fairly. We can make sure the people inside get out safe. We can make sure you get counsel. But if you bring anyone outside against their will, you make this much harder." She said it like a nurse telling a patient to take a breath. Calm, steady, matter of fact. Nate told everyone to move to the center of the lobby. He said they were going to the side exit. The manager said there wasn't a side exit. He didn't know who to believe. He ordered the tellers to throw the rest of the cash into a second bag. They did, slipping another die pack. He grabbed it and zipped it closed and slung it over his shoulder. Some red bled out the seam. He didn't notice. They clustered near the front as police spoke through a bullhorn, telling anyone inside to step away from the doors. Nate yelled for the children in the lobby, too, with their mother, to be moved to the chairs. Jay moved them and said nothing. Rafi stared at the glass until he could see his own shadow. Malik asked Nate again to stop. Nate told him to shut up. That sentence broke something between them that had been under strain since the pawn shop step. Nate pushed the first customer toward the door as the manager said, "Don't." The first customer said he had a family and began to cry without tears, the way fear dries a person from the inside. Nate stopped. He turned to the tellers and said he'd shoot the manager if the doors stayed locked. The manager said it wouldn't change the doors. She glanced at the phone. The negotiator said, "You can still walk this back and mend it." The back corridor door opened again. Jay came back angry and red-eyed, tried the vestibule button he found on the wall, and realized it was dead without a key. He cursed at electricity itself. He took a swipe at a trash can and knocked it over. The thud filled the lobby. People flinched. The sound lasted longer in their bodies than in the room. Rafi finally said it, "We're done." He didn't mean it like surrender. He meant it like fact. He pointed at the window. 2 more units had arrived. A negotiator van edged up. A tactical team staged out of sight. Even if they opened the doors, the street was a camera. The game, such as it was, had always been lopsided. The die pack in the second bag detonated. This time, everyone heard it. Red burst across Nate's sleeve. He threw the bag and staggered back. A teller screamed. Jay swore so hard it sounded like a song. Malik pressed his back against the wall and slid down until his knees hit his chest. Rafi put both hands on his head and stood very still. The negotiator said, "That was a die pack. No one is hurt. We can still do this safely." She spoke like instructions in a plane cabin. The sentence cut through the sound. It gave people something to do, breathe. Nate looked at his red sleeve and at the red on the floor and understood that he wasn't mysterious anymore. He wasn't dangerous in a way that would hold the room. He was just loud. He pushed the manager toward the door anyway and told her to unlock it. She said she couldn't. He told her again. His voice cracked into a higher register no one had heard from him before. She repeated that she couldn't. That's when his voice failed him. He stepped back, stared at the floor, and finally looked at Malik like a man asking for a different ending. Malik put his hands up first. He told the manager to tell the negotiator they were coming out. Jay said no way, then looked at the red on his jeans and said nothing else. Rafi nodded once like a man closing a book. Nate stood there with his mouth open and no words. The manager relayed the change. One of them wants to come out. The negotiator said, "Good. That's the right call. Hands up, no sudden moves, no objects." The manager repeated it to Malik. He nodded, swallowed, and walked with his arms high, fingers spread. He stepped into the vestibule and looked like he was walking into weather. The outer doors clicked open. He went through and put his knees on the pavement and cried in a clean way that made sense. Within minutes, the second followed. Rafi moved like he had already left the room in his head and was just waiting for his body to catch up. He put his hands on the glass before stepping out as if to steady his own reflection. He went to the ground without orders and kept saying sorry to no one and everyone. The negotiator said, "Two down. Two to go, ain't to the radio, not the phone." Jay tried to bolt for the back corridor again, tripped on the trash can he'd knocked over, and fell hard enough to knock the wind out of himself. Harris stepped toward him and stopped, hands still visible, and said, "Don't do anything stupid." Jay stared at the ceiling and saw fluorescent rectangles and thought about how ugly banks are when you're on the floor. He sat up and put his hands behind his head. He walked out next, angry at himself for tripping like a child. That left Nate, the voice, and the plastic gun, and the need to be someone. The room was smaller without his noise. He looked at the manager, then at the dye dripping from the bag he'd thrown, then at the lobby where a man in a suit held his diabetic kit like a passport. Nate put the toy on the counter like a real thing and looked surprised that it meant nothing. He told the manager to tell the negotiator
he wanted a car. The manager said softly, "It's over." The negotiator, without hearing that exchange, said on the line, "You don't want to be the last one in. Trust me." It landed like a hand on his shoulder. Nate walked out with his hands up and his eyes on the red stain on his sleeve. He stared at it like it was an answer to a question he hadn't asked. He knelt.
A cuff clicked, then another. A camera shutter popped from the crowd like a tiny firecracker. It was done. Inside, Harris helped people to their feet. He moved with the economy of a man who had decided to live. The manager told the tellers to breathe, then to call their families, then to start the incident checklist. The old man with the heart med sat and shook and then got very calm. The mother hugged her kids. The bank felt like a place again, not a stage. The aftermath looked like paperwork and boxes. Evidence teams bagged the fake guns, the taped screwdriver, the popped die packs, the backpack, the cash that didn't explode. They collected statements. They asked everyone to say the same thing twice. People did. The charges were automatic and heavy. Armed robbery, even with fake guns, is still armed robbery. Kidnapping for moving hostages became a count even though no one left the lobby. Assault for grabbing, terroristic threats for shouting about shooting. The prosecutors didn't have to stretch. The law doesn't care if the pistol was plastic when the fear was real. In interrogation rooms, The four told versions of the same story. It was an accident. It was a one-time thing. It was about debt. It was about respect. It was about being ignored and wanting to be seen. None of those lines moved a needle. Video from the bank, the dye on their clothes, the recovery of money with serial numbers logged in the branch ledger, those did. Malik took a plea. Jay tried to fight and then took a similar deal after seeing the first two plea offers. Rafi told the truth without drama and got the least. Nate tried to act like the system was conspiring and ended with the longest sentence. In court, they looked smaller than they had inside the bank because the bank had been a room they could fill with shouting, and the courtroom was a place where shouting dies fast. No one died in that lobby because the guard stayed smart, the manager stayed steady, and the negotiator used patience like a tool. But people were hurt in ways that don't show up well in photos. The mother's kids were afraid of glass doors for a month. The old man didn't go out for coffee anymore. The diabetic kept his kid in his hands in every lobby. The tellers learned that the training they resented was the reason they went home. The city didn't make a legend out of the four. It made a warning, a poster in branch break rooms with bullet points about silent alarms, die packs, and calm instructions, a refresher course on when to speak and how a line in guard briefings about ego, a suggestion to managers about the tone of voice that keeps a room steady. That's what changes when chaos visits. Small things. People asked why they did it without a plan. The answer is the same as always. They thought noise could beat structure. They thought hunger could beat training. They thought the bank was a movie and they were the main characters. A die pack taught them otherwise. They weren't professionals. They had no masks, no real weapons, no plan. Just anger, recklessness, and an insane idea at noon in a city that has seen much worse. It ended the way things end when sound tries to out systems, with cuffs, paperwork, and a stain that doesn't wash out easy. I'm Santa. If you liked this story and don't want to miss the next one, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. Tell me in the comments what kind of true crime story you want next.